back to the program, everyone. This is The Morning Brief. We are broadcasting live from our studios here in Lagos, Nigeria. And the campaigns officially have begun. That's what that piece of code signaled yesterday. And so much to unpack as we build up to the elections in 2027. We were speaking just a moment ago about the FCT minister's comments and on all of that. And, you know, again, I totally think that our politicians, I know that they are politicians, and we always say that politicians will always be politicians, but I think for the future of this country, for the future of this democracy, I think we have to be a bit more careful with the kind of comments that they make. And I know that we're used to those comments and all of that, but you know what, they have to be a bit more careful. I'm told that we have to go to our guests now, so let's leave this. We'll come back perhaps at the end of the show and take our final comments as regards all of this. We're joined this hour by Professor Jideofor Adibe. He's a journalist and Professor of Political Science and International Relations, Nasarawa State University. Thank you indeed, Prof, for agreeing to talk to us here on the program. So much to dissect and unpack with you. Perhaps we should get things started from Osun State, by the way, before we get to the piece of code. I'm wondering, in your view and standpoint, how much of a dress rehearsal was the elections in Osun State for 2027?
Yeah, thank you very much, and good morning to the team. First of all, let me start with a little disclaimer. I'm not a journalist. Before the people like you and others accuse me of fraud, I'm a writer and a columnist. Okay. I don't know whether that qualifies me to be called a journalist.
Well, so long as you're a writer, Prof. So long as you're a writer. It's print journalism.
So if I call myself a journalist, what do people like you and others call? That will become a contest over claims, and before you know it, my name will be in the list of those who are making false claims. But anyway, that's on a lighter note. Yeah. Let me say about the Osun election. There's what we call self-fulfilling prophecies. It is an instance where what you want to see in a situation will always be there for you to see. If you want to look at the Osun election as a precursor to if you want to take a very negative, I wouldn't like to use the word negative. If you want to say that it's going to be cataclysmic, that it's not going to go well, all the indices were there from the Osun election. The violence that preceded the election, you can look at that. You can also look at the issue of death. I think an estimated 30 people died. And you look at the malfunctioning of the beavers and the IRF and so on and so forth. If you want to look on the positive side of it, you can look at, okay, the president, congratulated him. It was a close fought battle, 511,000 to 444,000 plus. And in the aftermath of the election, there was no post-election violence so far. So, depending on what you want to focus on, all the indices of what they are part of a political culture, depends on which one you want to amplify, but they're all there. Would this be a signpost of what will happen in 2027? We have to see. Remember, the FCT minister was reported to have said that we should congratulate the president for not using federal might, and that if he had to utilize the federal might, the outcome would have been different. We don't know, but there's a lot loaded in that statement. So I'll leave it at that for now.
All right, Prof. Well, it is what it is. Federal might means that it would have been rigged one way or the other. That's the interpretation. Because from what he was trying to say was that he's been at the forefront of federal might being used against him in 2019, and he knows what federal might can do. So he said if we deploy, I think I also saw an interview by Jideofor who talked about if they deploy federal might, maybe they would have subverted the will of the people. Perhaps that's the extent. Because when people say federal might, that means all means necessary to sway the votes in our favor. They can debate that. That's another matter altogether. But as you said, we'll leave it to them. But
yes,
let's talk about some of the dynamics that we are looking at as far as this election is concerned. everything that has always played up in Nigerian politics is going to play up again. So it feels like we're not making as much progress. I know some people that accuse, especially the ruling party, are accused of using religion. You know, the Yes Daddy phone call and all of that. In fact, I had a gentleman who said Obi wouldn't have even gone as far as he went if he didn't have the church behind him. But all of them are almost guilty as well, because a Muslim ticket speaks to religion. By the calculation of the president, he feels that if I do this, if I don't do this, I'm going to lose this election. And he pulled it off, and he got his votes and got elected as president. So it may almost be foolhardy to think that religion doesn't play a role. So if you were to posit these three political parties, the major one, APC, ADC, and NDC, now that these campaigns will start, this navigation will begin, what should the citizens really help themselves to focus on? Because when the religion is played up as a means of winning election, we now face the reality of the impact of governance.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, let me say that it's a little naive for people to think that, or let me put it the other way around. There is what we call group dynamics in politics. Politics is about mobilization of your group identities, even abroad, so that we can talk about white votes, Mexican votes, white collar votes. The same way, if, for example, you're a journalist and you want to go and run, you want, because there are group dynamics. All the groups you belong to, remember, every individual is a composition of a mosaic of identities. You have your ethnic identity, you have your religious identity, you have your professional, and several others. You go to your town, you mobilize, you are son of the soil. So all these identities are mobilized. So that's why even your own labor union, that's why we say there are group dynamics in politics. What you mobilize when you are in politics are your group identities. So anybody expecting there will not be a mobilization of ethnicity and religion is not looking at politics the way we look at it. So it will be mobilized. And let me just say that all of the political parties, I don't know if you say guilty, but it's a natural thing. If you're a political strategist and you want to map out your own electoral geography, the first thing is to look at the dynamics. Which groups are likely to favor me? And it is on the basis of mapping of certain groups that you say, okay, this is going to be a swing state, this is going to be a safe state. So, and there's nowhere in the world where people say, let it be issue-based. Politics is essentially driven by emotions. So what you call, if you ask an average supporter of, say, the president, is he doing well? He will have enough data to reel out to you to show that he's doing well. He can mention from nail fund to, even if you put a goat on the throne, on the seat, in 6 months, in fact in 5 days, he will mention a few things that will qualify as achievement. On the other hand, because you will never be able to achieve everything, even if they give you 10 years, and because there are unintended consequences of any policy, your critics will always also find something they will use against you. So the issue of achievement, what I've accomplished, is by definition subjective. So they never really, they are only in few instances that they definitively affect the outcome of an electoral competition. The other thing I want to highlight is when people talk about war, the kind of campaigns and rhetorics and the kind of language and violence that happen in our own elections. There is a saying, one famous writer once said that elections are often, or politics is war without bloodshed. War is politics with bloodshed. And in fact, if you look at the similarity and contrast between war and politics, there is a lot of similarities. The major similarity is that both are contests over power and territory. The difference is that where you have a functioning democracy, then it is driven by institution. What is decisive becomes the head count, your votes. Whereas in war, what becomes decisive will be the body count, how many people you've killed. So we should always, when we talk about making issue based, there's nowhere in the world where you can say, even in countries that are apparently ethnically homogeneous, there will always be, for example, this person is marginalizing the middle class. That in itself is an identity. If this place is marginalizing one geographic area, that itself is an identity. So we have to understand identity politics, identity mobilization, as something that is inherently part of politics. And we do say in our identity studies that an identity that is perceived to be under threat will always be the one most vociferously defended. If politicians come around and tell you your identity as a middle class is under threat, you are going to support that one. You're going to do everything to protect that identity. And so it is with ethnic identity, so it is with religious identity. Thank you.
And that brings me to the next question. How do we then move from, politics of identity, or if you like, parochialism, to what it really should be, the contest of ideas? How should we begin to, navigate or take the attention away from that to set the agenda? That's on the one hand. On the other hand, we know, what has brought us here was yet to recover, as my colleague said earlier, about, all is fair in politics, ascribed to the president. As a matter of fact, one of the candidates that appended his signature to the accord yesterday had an exchange, with one of the actors in Osun politics, which made the news. Are you confident that we're not going to be hearing negative campaign rhetoric, hate speech, in spite of the signing of the accord yesterday? So those two poses.
Well, I think if you bring in the identity thing, it's very difficult to navigate. The difference between our climb and Western climb is that in societies where this basis of statehood, basis of nationhood have been resolved and agreed upon, it is easier after this fight, this war without bloodshed. After that is concluded, society comes back together to unite on basic things especially about economic principles. But in our own context, there are two distinguishing features. Because the basis of nationhood remains contested, each election, in fact, often elections come before the wounds open from the election cycles have been properly healed. The election cycle now opens up all those wounds. And remember, we are coming from a period of prolonged autocracy. So the pent-up feelings from that period of autocracy is come upon people. Virtually every group has institutional memories of hurts and of being taken advantage of. So when that happens, that identity of being maltreated comes again into force, making it more difficult for us to resolve the issue of what you call how do we navigate identity. That's just basic thing. Otherwise, identities are things you have to factor in. And why is identity going to be a factor in? I did say that in politics of language, you play up fear. Playing up fear is part of your ways of mobilizing the we-they dichotomy. This group is going to dominate you. Remember, one of the reasons why in our kind of societies, politics tends to be anarchic is the fear that whichever group that captures state power will use it to disadvantage the others and advantage its in-group. That fear is pervasive. So you play up that and various other things follow. So we are not going to, in the short to medium term, completely escape this form of identity politics, the negative aspect of it. And that is why some of us have been saying that we need to rethink our own form of democracy. I personally believe that the form of democracy, liberal democracy we're running is very antithetical, does not promote, hurts the nation building process, especially that wounds are not healed, another election comes. And anybody telling you that we're going to escape from religious mobilization, ethnic mobilization, is not telling you the truth. The reason people think it's only a problem of ethnicity and religion is because the class consciousness, do not in a Marxian sense. The idea of I am middle class, I'm upper class, I'm employer is often very subsumed to your broader ethnic and religious identity. So it's going to be there with us. How do we move away from this winner takes all form? How do we move away from this type of democracy that seems to widen the social distance among Nigerians? I think that should be one of the paramount questions we should be posing.
Yeah. Well, Prof, I mean, you have painted a picture about our identity and the kind of politics that we play. A big question mark would also be the role that money and the money bags play in the polls. INEC, we understand, has set about $10 billion, 10 billion naira rather, for the presidential bids, 3 billion for governorships in terms of, issues around spending limits. 10 billion naira for presidential campaigns and spending limits. The governorship, 3 billion naira. How realistic is that? Because money plays a dominant role in the kind of politics that we play. Nomination forms, for instance, is in hundreds of millions. The adverts, we heard of issues, or we reported votes buying, for instance, in Osun states where people got as much as 50,000 naira, at the polls. And this is a general election. So I wonder perhaps if you think INEC is being realistic, and how can we even make this idea of money and the commercialization of our politics, how can we reduce that?
Even in the Western world, even in the US, campaign funding remains an issue that is very difficult to police. For example, when even you put a cap in the Western world, the surrogates, the groups that are supporting you, that are mobilizing their own money independent of you, they can raise any amount of money and use it again. So it's essential, even in mature democracies, only those raised by political parties themselves, which tend to be a fraction of the money spent. In Nigeria, I don't think people have tried to, harass anybody because of exceeding the campaign limit. Even the donations people make to political parties, how many people have been called to question because they donated a certain amount of money? So it is more of formalism, and INEC, I don't think, many people don't. I don't know how many people take that serious. But even then, what we should be thinking about is, again, it goes back to what some of us are critical of about the kind of liberal democracy we're running. If people do not believe that their vote counts, who counts, they are more likely to sell. And it is not just the election that is commoditized. And election is just a reflection of what happens in other domains, in other arenas of our political and social life. Virtually everywhere you go, if you visit somebody, if you visit some relatives who are going back, you're expected to drop something. That's also commercialization. If you people open gates, you visit your friends and the gatemen, greet you very well and say, "Oh God, we are here." You're expected to drop something. That's drop Nigerian balance. So this commercialization is again a reflection of our national life, their culture. So I understand that people are worried, but we should not isolate one domain and expect that once that domain is sanitized, what is then happening in other wider society will not affect it. I'm not saying that is right. I'm saying that it's a reflection which we have to look at holistically.
Yeah, Prof, as we wind down, I think politics and politicians sometimes are generally the same around the world. It is worse in some climes than the others. The only difference is that there are institutions to check. And there's something that bothers me ahead of this election. And it's really troubling because for us it's about institutional preservation. And politicians will be politicians as it is. Cardinal Nikon and the Catholic Bishop met the president and he granted an interview, and then the presidency came gun blazing because they felt it was partisan. They call it abuse of clerical privileges. In fact, it was long for a week. Not so long after that, we saw a sheikh who made a very careless statement, with the greatest respect, about calling Christians infidel. And then no one from the presidency, the state institutions did not go after him, neither the police nor the DSS. Nobody went after him for inflammatory statement. Just before the election in Osun State, Senator Fadanwosi, from his mouth to our listening ears, so everyone who understands Yoruba, he made a public threat to the people of Accord and Accord Party.
Yeah.
But later said he was misquoted and all of that. He went to the police. Now, I reeled out all of this to show that it was like ahead of the 2027 election, we're setting a template for selective justice. How can institutions redeem themselves now? Because the campaigns will soon start, fireworks will begin, irresponsible statements will be made, and people will be watching how government will respond.
It's a reflection of the fact that our institutions are weak. You can see that in US, despite the persona of President Trump, sometimes he loses his case in the Supreme Court. And there are people, journalists, who are calling him out, and nothing happens. But you can see even in Osun State, I was telling people that Adeleke played smart by not choosing even members of the NDC or ADC with serious candidates, presidential candidates, as members of his rainbow. Or if he had joined any of those still like NDC and ADC, the outcome would probably have been different. So even the statement by Wike, with all due respect, that if the president wanted that the outcome, he would have used the federal might, and that he didn't. In other words, we should give him credit because he chose not to. That itself tells you about the personalization of power rather than institution-driven arrangements. So if the president wants, the outcome will be different. And that's why you can see almost all the governors that are not in APC, people are joining APC because they recognize him. Here is a master strategist. He's both a fox, he's both a Machiavellian. So if you are, in groupthink, that's promotes concurrency in behavior. If you are not for us, you are against us. So the safest way, Adeleke himself has already come out by saying, look, I'm supporting the president. So that itself tells you about the weakness of our institution. Almost in one state, Edo State, somebody will say, I'm promising you 2.5 million votes. In fact, if you come to our meeting and not wearing Tinubu cap, I will send you out. That is not about the whole people talking about one party, fear of one party state. No, it's about the fear of one man rule. It's about the personalization of power rather than, it's a reflection of absence of institution, not even in weak institutions. There may be institutions in them, but they don't function. And if you look at what happened, the EFCC going in and the president coming to say, look, take this thing back, restore the, go and get court order and do this. The fact that the president himself had to intervene and let people know that he didn't know about what was happening will in itself tell you about the extent of the personalization of power, not institutions. And that's the problem. It's a reflection of where we are in the political development stages.
All right. Well, it's a fine place to leave it, Professor Jideofor. I mean, so much to unpack with you as regards the build-up to the 2027 polls. But the picture you've painted is like it's going to take some time for us to make that transition from the culture that we have here to perhaps a better kind of politics and politicking that we play. Professor Jideofor is a journalist, professor of Political Science and International Relations, Nasarawa State University. Thank you indeed for your time and insights on the program, Prof.
Yeah, thank you. Once again, you called me a journalist and you want people now to come after me.
They're not going to come after you.
False claim.
Yeah, right, sir.
I've never been I'm not a journalist.
Well, when you write here, you can be classified as one. It's Prince journalism, Prof.
Okay, you said that. I didn't ascribe it to myself. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your time. Well, this is the morning brief. We have one more essential conversation with someone you do not want to miss. He's the former Minister of Sports. He's a legal lawyer by training, and someone who wants to speak about himself as someone who likes to pursue justice, Mr. Solomon Dalong. Well, some will say it's the comrade Solomon Dalong. But guys, let's take a listen, take a look at a few things that are trending just before we head to that conversation. I understand we have to take a moment. When we come back, we'll just get to chit chat a bit about what you're saying on socials. But back in just a moment. Please stay with us.